Well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started, and hopefully, something's going wrong with the music there. So, let's make sure that the music was all chopped up and messing up for some reason. So let's make sure that they can hear us.
Can
Love
you
the.
hear me?
I can hear you good. Can you hear me good?
Mm-hmm.
Audience, let us know if we are good. I don't know why the music was all messed up, choppy. Let me just remove that file from Streamlabs and add a different music file later, see if that works. Okay, remove that. Can you guys hear us? Father Deacon, would you give us a test? Check, check.
Check, test. Mic, test.
Okay, so everything's good. It's just the music was messed up for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay, welcome everybody. If you don't know, of course, Father Deacon has just done a live stream a couple days ago where he presented the paper that I saw him present at a conference. And the paper was titled Gnostic Scientism and Technocratic Totalitarianism. And it's an excellent paper. It's a critique of basically all of modernity. So remember, we're going to be very careful, Father Deacon, for the algorithm and the what terms we use here for the carunk and all that. But
Yeah.
you want to lay out
I had to do the same
yeah,
online
right.
too. So
Well, I watched your stream and it was really good. So how do you want to kick this off? How do you want to start it off, and what moved you to write this paper?
several things that kind of came together. And I love that about philosophy, when you could be working on different things and then all of a sudden they come together, which is nice to be able to tie what would seem to be unconnected things, and be kind of able to see that kind of underlying principle behind it all. But it started from I'm teaching a 19th, 20th century socio-political philosophy class here up in Montana at Carroll College. And so over the summer, I had to spend a considerable amount of time trying to figure out what books and what material I was going to use. When you create a class from scratch, it's a lot more difficult than if obviously from building. So you really have to put in the most effort kind of at the beginning. And I was thinking about a theme. We professors like to have that, like a theme going through. But the theme that I wanted people to see was that there was a fundamental shift between the man of antiquity, the way that human beings saw nature, God, the polis, themselves, and then again, themselves in relation to them all, in a fundamentally different way than the moderns. There's a distinct shift. I want people to be able to see that. So when you are reading some of, beginning with kind of like Descartes, and going through into, the political, later political philosophers like Machiavelli, Hobbes, Rousseau, Locke, the Enlightenment thinkers, Kant, Voltaire, and these people, that obviously something is radically different in the way that they envision nature and themselves. I want people to pick up on this. So I was thinking about a theme like that, but I wanted it to have some relevance. I wanted people to, through studying the history of thought in these thinkers, to be able to see, how did we get here? In order to better understand where we're at right now and our place in the crisis and various things that we're dealing with, it's important to kind of understand that history from a philosophic perspective as well as historic perspective. So I was kind of thinking about that. And so I'd actually designed the course to begin with Machiavelli and go through Hobbes, Rousseau. I even did Reformation political thought, through the Enlightenment, into Burke. And prior to that, we did kind of classical liberalism. And once we finished up that book, we segue into, because in the book we actually treat Saint Simon and Comte and positivism. And so each phase is kind of changing. And then the last part of this course is going to be technocracy, the age that we're in now.
Gotcha.
And one of the books that I picked was Eric Voegelin's Science, Politics, and Gnosticism. And then could you
possibly everybody's saying your audio is a little low. I've got you pulled up all the way on my end as high as I could get you. So
let's see how I can turn up my audio.
If you check your computer settings and see if the audio input is all the way up or if it's low. Now you sound good to me, but multiple audience people are saying that it's a little low. But on my end, I've got you turned up all the way.
Let's see. Let me pull up my microphone. That's strange that would be coming out that way. Now I could, on my preamp, crank it up. Hello, 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 hello. That's all the way up. How are you guys?
Yeah, everybody says it's really good, really low.
What else could I do? Okay, let's see.
Okay. People are saying it's a little better. Did you do anything?
Yeah, I cranked up my preamp.
All right. They may be messing with us and trolling us. I can't tell.
1 second. Let me see if I do something on...
A lot of people are saying it's fine. Let me... can you do a test? Can you talk for a second?
Test 1, 2, 3. Audio settings. Okay, I'm going to do something here. Watch this. Hello? 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 Here's output. How about that? Better? Better, guys?
It sounds like you're coming through your... on my end, like you're coming through your internal computer speakers. And, I mean, didn't you got a microphone, right?
Yeah, my preamp's on. It says, let's see, microphone.
Okay, is your Zoom setting, your Zoom setting might be not coming through that good microphone, but through the computer.
It says, yeah, it's coming through my microphone. So sorry about this, guys. So I've got my input level on my microphone as high as possible on my through the Zoom. I've got my preamp all the way up. 1, 2, 3, 4.
I mean, is that... I'm not trying to be a jerk. Is it a cheap mic or a good mic?
No, it's a really expensive one. I've never had any.
It doesn't sound like it's even coming through that mic. It sounds like you're just talking into your laptop speakers. I mean, your laptop mic. So.
Huh, weird. What if I shut off the preamp? Let's see what happens. Is that any better?
Doesn't change.
1, 2, 3.
Let's just go with it. We'll have to go with it as it is.
I'm so sorry about that. I don't understand.
It's not your fault. It just sounds like it's not a good mic. It just sounds like you're talking into the laptop.
Shoot. Yeah, it was fine on the stream that I did, so I don't know what could possibly be. Now, when I have it play back, it sounds really good through the Zoom. I wonder if going through yours.
I mean, when I can tell what they're talking about, it just sounds like it's not coming through your mic, but I don't know. Let's just go.
Okay.
We'll go with
1, 2, 3. Let's just see something here. Better, 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 better.
That's better.
So I'm turning up the input volume on the Zoom and turning down on the preamp.
Okay. Let's just go with that.
All right. So anyways, here, this book here, Science, Politics, and Gnosticism, and then thinking about all of that in light of philosophy of science. You know, Jay, you and I do a lot of kind of those conversations about what are the things you can know in science, what types of knowledge, why does science change? And then because you and I do a lot of work also in epistemology, how do we know anything at all? What makes knowledge possible? And issues about trust when it comes about epistemology, right? Because we all have presuppositions that we put our trust in.
Right.
People, all of this kind of coalesced into the current crisis that we're going through with the CUF.
Real quick,
yeah.
could you flesh something out that the audience might not be aware of? That I know you covered it a lot, but I've heard you many times kind of give a basic rundown of the different types of knowledge that even the Greeks talked about. Could you briefly mention that?
Yeah. So you have several different words. Science or scientia is knowledge in Latin. The Greek word would be episteme. And you also have gnosis, Gnosis. You have theoria, poesis. And what the Greeks had all these different terms. And you also had, what was the word that I was thinking about today from Plato? Phronesis, like applied...
where we get like phronema for the mindset.
That something that comes from a wisdom or something like that, an application of like the state of wisdom. They had all these different words for knowledge. Now, one thing that's important is, let's just pick two of those words, poesis and then theoria. Theoria is what we would call theoretical knowledge. That would be knowledge that's desirable for its own sake. It's an end. Now, you may have some practical use or can apply it or something like that. But the idea is, how do I test that something actually is an end? It's desirable in its own right, that it's theoretical versus kind of practical. Well, if you took away the usefulness of it, would you still desire it? So think about this. If you took away the usefulness of money, would you still desire it? No, so it's a means.
Mm-hmm.
If you took away the usefulness of, like, say, trading, like, let's say the usefulness is trading or selling art or something like that, would beautiful art still be desirable?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So it's an end in its own right, and it's desirable for its own right. So the Greeks have this kind of idea that there's certain things, i.e. like transcendentals, the beautiful, the true, and the good, and different disciplines and subjects that are desirable for their own right, even if you took away their use. That is the kind of notion of theoria. Then there's knowledge that's applied knowledge, doing, making, poesis, of which you're desiring that specifically because you want to make something. And that had something to do with the Greek word techne,
Mm-hmm.
which is the tool of the artisan. So you desire tools so that you can do something with it. And I bring this into kind of a conversation with the empirical sciences that we have today are always concerned with a techne. It's it might involve, theory at times, like, theories, but the overall enterprise is directed at kind of predicting and making and doing. It's a techne. So I think it's helpful to go back to the etymology of those words.
Yeah, definitely.
Because then because what we're going to talk about tonight, if we don't make those kinds of distinctions between the different disciplines and the different meanings of the words, then you can see how easily one slips into treating a applied knowledge, a techne, into universal metaphysics and religion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely want to get to. That's a good way to kind of lay out the intro here. Let's get into the paper, and you start out talking about how technology isn't inherently evil, and we need to keep that in mind so we don't fall into weird Gnostic, superstitious types of attitudes. But at the same time, we got to start this out with understanding the Enlightenment. And before we do that, could I get you to just real quick? So on the Zoom image where the microphone is, if you click that little pointing up thing, and then up at the top where it says select a microphone, are you sure that it's the one that's not built-in microphone?
Okay, so I'm doing same as system now. Is that better?
I don't think it shouldn't be that. That's the
microphone.
Wrong.
Okay, now I'm switched to microphone. I don't know why this is given.
What's your options up there?
Microphone. The Aki PCLM USB microphone, which is my microphone, I think.
Yeah, that sounds like that should be the right one.
I just don't understand. This is driving me crazy. When technology turns evil. Okay, so I have a microphone turned all the way up.
What are your options under the Zoom microphone section up there?
That's it. Same as system, and then.
And what?
Here's same as system.
Okay.
Here's microphone. USB microphone, the one that I have right now.
Okay. Should be the USB microphone, right? That's what is that black one next to you?
That's on, yeah.
Okay.
Now, if I do test mic on this, it comes back really clear. So I don't understand from my end anything else different that I could do.
Okay, that's fine. There's just one last thing I wanted to check because I don't know, people are just keep talking about it. So let's move on. I'm sorry. Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is in many ways a philosopher, historian of ideas. Peter Gray characterized the Enlightenment as a return to paganism, and it's a return to paganism because we are often told that the Enlightenment was about getting rid of superstition.
By the way, I figured it out.
What is it?
Forgive me, guys. Watch this. I was using this plug in the back to charge myself up earlier today, so it's not actually going to the computer and doing a. Watch how much better this is. Love.
Wait, what? All right, so
can you hear me?
Is that better, guys?
My preamp wasn't plugged in, so it was actually exactly what he said. It was just picking up like the computer microphone and not this thing.
Okay. Are you sure that still under Zoom it's the right one? Clicked.
Still no. 1 second. Watch this. 1, 2.
There you go. Now you are the right microphone. Thank you. Yes. I mean, it sounded like you were in a tin can. It sounded terrible. Now you're good. Thank you so much.
Let's stop the video and start it all over.
Let's start everything over. No, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, I'm kidding. I've done that with my class and realized I forgot it to record the Zoom. I'm like, okay, let's do it all over again.
Yes. Now you're not sounding like it. It sounded terrible. So we don't want you to sound terrible during this excellent paper. Now, so the Enlightenment.
Let's talk about, first of all, you'd mentioned, that's an important point. Remember, techne and technology is simply the tool of the artisan, and so it's not inherently bad.
Mm-hmm. Can you turn yourself back up because the echo and all the crappy sound is still gone, but you're low?
How about that? Better?
Nope, too high, too high.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5.
Better,
6,
better.
7. Good there or lower?
No, that's good, I think.
Okay.
Is he better now?
Lower?
I'm not trying to be difficult, but you were very low. Like, so the quality is a lot better, but that's too high? Okay.
Too high. So sorry about this, guys.
That's much better. You're much better.
Okay, good. All right, sorry.
We're good now. We're good.
The volume's up.
Yes, we're good. You're good now. You're solid.
Okay.
That chat that I see is like a minute behind, so but I can tell you're noticeably better.
Jay says I'm noticeably better.
Yeah, really good now.
I'm letting my neighbors know. Jay says it's all good, guys. Hello? Is that your Neuralink?
Yeah, I'm just making sure you sound good.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2.
Okay, you're good now. I can hear you on the stream, on the YouTube app. You sound good. Okay, proceed.
Technology is not inherently
Now you're
bad.
perfect. Oh, it's so crisp and clear. You sound so good right now.
So much better.
Do some Deacon ASMR. You do actually you do a lot of ASMR beard sounds. We hear your beard a lot. So. There we go.
I'm sorry, just messing around, guys. It's fun to mess around, right? And do philosophy at the same
We
time.
don't. You have that awesome mic setup that you told me all about. Your buddy came or relative came and set up. So we don't want you not utilizing that wonderful sound quality that you have.
I sold my house and my family in
Right.
slavery just to get
this microphone and this amp. Okay, so
I
let's.
can't believe that I forgot to plug that in.
It's okay. I do the same thing. Enlightenment. So we're often told that the Enlightenment was this reason-based era that was going to rid the world of superstition and get rid of priests. And, Voltaire says he's going to strangle priests with their own entrails. And we're going to have a goddess of reason, according to the revolutionaries eventually, right? So reasoning is now supposed to be what will save us from the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages and the superstition and the darkness, blah, 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 blah. Magic flute, right? Mozart's magic flute is all about this. However, even secular scholars and philosophers like Peter Gay have written entire 3-volume works about how the Enlightenment was the return of paganism. I have 1 volume of that, and I think he's correct because really the Enlightenment and the so-called return to reason and the principles of nature, so-called, and decoding the principles of nature will actually lead to this notion of the domination of nature in a pagan sense. And so what the Enlightenment actually does is demythologize the world and de-essentialize the world from there being any real objective essences in the world. And so thus there's no objective meaning that man discovers in the world. There's no objective moral orientation. There is no church or anything supernatural. Now we're back in this world of determined process, unfortunately, is where it leads. And so,
by the way, that was perfectly stated. I just read in my class. I can't remember. I've got my book in the other room. I have it highlighted. Where I don't remember if it was Leo Strauss or I forget what political commentator actually said that the Enlightenment and modernity was modern paganism.
Yeah, Peter Gay is famous for that. He's a historian of ideas.
Yeah, I think it was Peter Gay, actually, if I remember right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think he demonstrates that very well in the book. But go ahead.
Yeah, well put. That's exactly what I was thinking too.
Well, it's interesting because everybody thinks that it's about the rejection of superstition and reasoning. But so that's why we're getting to Voegelin and Gnosticism, because what we're learning is that this period is actually the opposite of what most people think. It's actually a return to paganism under the guise of reasoning and debunking superstition.
Yep, that's right. And again, I mean, there's nothing wrong with knowledge too, but what you'll see in the shift between the man of antiquity and the modern man is how these various things like technology and knowledge are situated, the various restraints, how one views it. And it's very much kind of like the soul. If it's not in proper harmony, then what would normally and naturally be virtue becomes vice. And I think you see that going on in modernity, is that you remove certain things, you switch the kind of the emphasis, and you start to get these things get out of whack. So there's if you try to eliminate certain things that are by nature and good, then you're bound to get kind of perversions, and then knowledge takes a kind of different place and becomes something different. Science becomes something different than science. It takes on this kind of quasi religious, and as you said, it becomes mythology.
Yeah. Right.
So I wanted to make that clear in the paper as well. And we'll see the link with Gnosticism.
Yeah.
It might be hard to think that, like, what is ancient Gnosticism?
Well, you in this paragraph, you talk about the loss of objective meaning, the loss of value, and the rise of will to power. And that's really what sets the stage for where we are nowadays, which is no more living in a world of divine order, but rather living in a order of kind of chaos that man or the power elite or the technocratic elite then sort of impose their will upon, right, the external world to create values, to create social order. And so maybe you could go into that, like why are we in this world of now?
And you'll see this even going into, like, we talk about like natural law, this idea that, I mean, ultimately, you know, in medieval ages and stuff like that, the idea of natural law was grounded in natural essences in nature, which gave an objective kind of telos, right? There was teleology in nature, first of all. But it gave objectivity both for, you know, man and what everything is. But what happens when you remove that? And it's just, well, now it's just matter. There are no kind of immaterial forms or essences or natures. There's no teleology. Well, that's going to become a problem. And then if you couple that with the fact that you then remove God, and what you'll see is like the Enlightenment thinkers still want to use this language of natural law, but it's all nominalism.
Yeah.
It's not really, it's like, oh, it's not actually grounded in nature. It's now reason, right? And these kind of laws of reason. And eventually that's just going to be critiqued and done away with as well. And so really what ends up happening is, and if I read this, because I like it from Dr. Bruce Foltz. Such a world offers no inner resistance to manipulation and control, presents no grain against which we ought not to cut. In Heidegger's word, it's a world that has become an inventory or a resource. What is it? A resource, in German Bestand, for technological control and consumption. So that's the kind of idea that, and Nietzsche talks about this, that if you remember from the Gay Science, the famous God is Dead. Mm-hmm. Well, once we kind of sever the transcendent ground of being, I mean, this is already well within like having mechanized nature. So you can't appeal to objective essences in nature, no kind of objectivity. So at that point, people still in the Enlightenment were deists, and you give a hat tip to kind of the law of reason, natural law, only
Right.
reason, okay? And God is kind of the author of that, but didn't have it wasn't personal. He didn't have kind of a personal interaction with. But Nietzsche picks up on this and goes, okay, now that you've killed God, now there is, nature's mechanized, that, well, all that this leaves is for man's will to power, right? Then killing God, you must become God to be worthy of such a deed. And so inevitably, again, this is going to lead to that kind of willpower, these kinds of moves. And you can see that tracing this out in history and through the philosophers and the political philosophers too. They become more and more obsessed with anthropocentric considerations and not theocentric. That's a huge mark too that you start to notice.
Mm-hmm.
Even when these people say that they're Christians, you get this even in the Reformation. More anthropocentric considerations than theocentric, especially in the political sphere and public life.
All right, so.
And I'll eventually tie that into, well, how is that Gnostic? Like, what is it exactly about? Why am I identifying, why is Eric Voegelin identifying these kinds of moves and philosophers with Gnosticism? Because he says that the essence of modernity is Gnosticism.
Right.
And then he says it's a spiritual sickness.
Well, another thing, too, that people might not know about, you talk about, was this... So Voegelin says, philosophy springs from the love of being. It is man's loving endeavor to perceive the order of being and to attune himself to it. Gnosis derives from desire's dominion over being in order to seize control of being the Gnostic. Of being, the Gnostic constructs his system. The building of systems is a Gnostic form of reasoning and not a philosophical one. I think this is a good point to contrast the revealed theology that we have, right, in Orthodoxy, that we don't do a project of system building like German idealists do, like Hegel did, like Neoplatonists did, of well, I'm going to adopt this religion and I'm going to build this big superstructure of philosophy and then wed or conform the Christian revelation to it. For us, it's the opposite, right? There's a great essay by Father Florovsky, Revelation and Philosophy and the relationship between the two. And he points out that the proper balanced attitude is one in which the church is not Hellenized, but she churchifies Hellenization, or the Hellenism, excuse me. So she can take from the systems what is true, piecemeal, but she doesn't adopt an entire philosophic superstructure and its presuppositions. And so the fundamental difference is that we're not building a system, we are accepting a handed down tradition and system that is not man-made. Yes, God has in different times and different places revealed truth to different men, but the body of revelation that the church is committing to us, including the metaphysical truths and principles that we see outlined in Christology and in Trinitarian theology and in St. Maximus's metaphysic, etc., they are coming to us as part of a body of tradition that's handed down. And so therefore, even though individual Orthodox philosophers might make insightful contributions and so forth, we are not doing system building. And that's the fundamental difference that you're pointing out from Voegelin here between us and Gnostics.
Yeah, and so I was trying to find the quote in here. It was really interesting that the Gnostic will always see that if there's problems, the problem isn't due to you, it's due to the world. That the world's not right.
Oh yeah, exactly. Good point.
It's chaotic, right? And then what you kind of have too is that, at least in the ancient forms of Gnostic, the good God's not actually involved, is he?
Right. Yeah,
He's not
he's the
responsible.
far off deistic, unknowable God, and the bumbling demiurge, right? The blind
Right.
fool demiurge is who we interact with.
So it's not going to be God that solves the problem of the chaos and disorder and problems of this world, the prison. Ultimately, it lies in man's power through gnosis, right?
Yeah.
That he is going to, and this is why Voegelin is going to identify any political philosophy that's utopian is Gnostic, because it attempts to have that same kind of reasoning that my will be done on earth as I see fit. I will actually, through knowledge, construct the system and make the utopia here, order reality, and eventually free my pneuma, my spirit, from this prison of alienation of the world and rise to the good God, spirit, pneuma.
Yeah, maybe briefly too, we should just mention kind of what exactly Gnosticism is, because I know a lot of our followers and watchers will already know, but probably a lot are new and don't. And so this is really the idea of a lot of different, it's a sort of a smattering of movements and cults and philosophers that existed primarily around the time of the early Christian church. So even in Paul's epistles, we already have this warning not to be duped to Timothy by the gnosis falsely so called. There's other traditions amongst the church fathers that Simon Magus was the first of the so-called Gnostic teachers. And then what we get in the second and third century,
I think it eventually comes out of the kind of mystery religions too. Prior,
definitely.
kind of Greek philosophy. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, there's a confluence, right? There is a confluence of interest between aspects of Platonism, aspects of pagan philosophy, and then Neoplatonism will have similarities and differences with Gnostic systems. Basically, there's a whole bunch of Gnostic systems. And so if you read Irenaeus' Against Heresies, first 300 pages is just on and on and on and on and on, cataloging every conceivable different kind of weird Gnostic sect that you could think of. And he really just shows us this panorama view of all the different movements. Some of them tended towards antinomianism, and some of them tended more towards a kind of weird asceticism. So they're all over the place, but basically the commonalities tend to be the preference for a higher unity of the monad over against the multiplicity of this world, the preference for ideas and reason as better than physicality and the material realm being some kind of trap or prison, the body being a prison for the soul or the spirit. Every man has this spark of divinity by which he can, if he realizes the true knowledge and attains the true mystic secrets or the secret word or the secret password or whatever, he can then kind of climb the chain of being and attain his previous immaterial, disembodied state of divinity, right? So another good example of this kind of system would be Origenism. Origenism is a more or less Gnostic-ish type of system that was trying to really...
so it's Kabbalah, which he actually brings up in here.
Yeah, Gershom Scholem has the premier 20th century historian and scholar on Kabbalism has basically characterized Kabbalism as just another manifestation of Gnosticism. So that's exactly what we have here is representations of these same ancient heresies and ancient mistakes and ancient presuppositions. We could even mention something like Manichaeanism, right? And Augustine was involved in Manichaeanism for a while, and Manichaeanism was known for its dualism, right? Anything that is light and spirit is good, and evil is located or identified with this world, this realm, this dimension, time, physicality, etc. So all of those kinds of systems, be they monistic or be they dualistic, are similar to or manifested in various Gnostic systems.
I had a friend who had asked me, like, where did Gnosticism originate? I said, the devil.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, I mean, in many of the Gnostic systems, whether it's the Basilidians or the Valentinians, you get the idea, or the Sethians, you get the idea that the serpent is the liberator, right? So the Jehovah God, the creator, is the evil imprisoning God, And then the serpent becomes the Luciferian liberator who's there to actually free man from the imprisonment of what they call either Jehovah or Yaldabaoth, right? Yaldabaoth is the blind, bumbling creator god that the Luciferian deity helps you seek freedom from. So you see that this is why Gnosticism appeals to, throughout history, a lot of satanic movements, a lot of hermetic movements, because it just takes everything in the biblical presentation and inverts it, right? The creator God.
Remind me to come back to talking about the golem in its time in the Kabbalistic text of Judah ben Bethaira. You already mentioned him, right? The text.
I mentioned Gershom Scholem, but I've not mentioned any specific. I mean, there's Isaac Luria, and there's Nachmanides, and there's all kinds of different Kabbalists that we could talk about.
Let me just go over real quick too, just to kind of summarize what you just said, Jay. That Eric Voegelin says there are 6 characteristics taken together reveal the nature of a Gnostic attitude. 1, it must be pointed out that the Gnostic is dissatisfied with the situation. This is the quote I was talking about. This in itself is not especially surprising. We all have cause not to be completely satisfied with one aspect or another of the situation in which we find ourselves. But here, 2, not quite so understandable is the second aspect of the Gnostic attitude, the belief that the drawbacks of the situation can be attributed to the fact that the world is intrinsically poorly organized. For it is likewise possible to assume that the order of being, as it is given to us men, wherever its origin is to be sought, is good, and that it is we humans who are inadequate. But the Gnostics are not inclined to discover the human beings in general, and they themselves in particular are inadequate. This is kind of that divine spark that you're talking about. It's not our problem, right? If in a given situation something is not as it should be, then the fault is to be found in the wickedness of the world, not us, right? 3, the third characteristic is the belief that salvation from the evil of the world is possible. 4, from this follows the belief that the order of being will have to be changed in a historical process. From the wretched world, a good one must evolve historically. This assumption is not altogether self-evident, because the Christian solution might also be considered, namely, the world throughout history will remain as it is, and that man's salvational fulfillment is brought about through grace and death. Isn't that interesting? So as you pointed, it's just the inverse of the Christian narrative. 5, with the 5th point, we come to the Gnostic trait. In a narrow sense, the belief that a change in the order of being lies in the realm of human action, that this salvational act is possible through man's own effort. 6, if it is possible, however, so to work a structural change in the given order of being, that we can be satisfied with it as a perfect one, then it becomes the task of the Gnostic to seek out the prescription for such change. Knowledge, gnosis, of the method of altering being is the essential concern of the Gnostic. The 6th feature of the Gnostic attitude, therefore, we recognize the construction of a formula for self and for world salvation, as well as the Gnostic's readiness to come forward as a prophet who will proclaim his knowledge about the salvation for mankind. And you see that also in alchemy too.
Yeah.
This as well. So that's kind of a good summary. And what we're going to see too is that if the world is disordered and it's not our fault, and the good God is not involved, already they've severed the transcendent ground, i.e. God, wisdom, from the intelligible order of being. So God is not part of the picture.
Right.
And as Nietzsche says, that's the Nietzschean deicide, right? We've killed God. We are the murderers of all murderers. How are we going to reconcile this? What festivals of atonement must we do? Must we not become gods just to make ourselves worthy of such action? And so this is what the Gnostic does in all his forms. God, the good God, is not present. the world is disordered. It's not my fault, but salvation lies within me.
Yeah.
Because I must become God. God is dead. And therefore, you must make the utopia. You must construct the system.
Yes.
But in constructing the system, you have to conceal the sins, the deicide.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I make a point on that?
Yeah.
That it made me think of. So if you read Father Meyendorff's excellent Byzantine theology book, there's many places, about 10 different places in the book where he does a really sufficient critique of Origenism and the presuppositions of Origenism. And one of the things that he notes is that the Origenist system was very different in understanding man's fall, because it located the fall in this kind of pre-temporal, pre-existent soul realm, where mankind turned his gaze away from the unity of the one, the beatific vision, and he fell into a bodily existence. And so bodily existence is one of man's problems. And then man has to kind of escape that and get back to the one, because there's just something fundamentally gross and lower and bad about the body. And so even though Origen's system is not exactly the same as the Gnostic systems, and it's not exactly the same as Neoplatonism, you see a lot of the parallels and the tendencies about the dialectical presuppositions. And one of the ones that's really problematic is, as Meyendorff notes, misunderstanding the fall. So what Origen does is just like many of these same mistakes that the Gnostics make, is they make the fall something metaphysical. The reason man fell was that he had a problem in his being. His being was bad. Yeah. He lacked true gnosis or something like this. And so the way back to salvation is a process of knowing more facts or gaining secret knowledge. When that's not man's problem. Man's problem is ethical. The fall is ethical. Now, there are epistemic and metaphysical results of the fall, but those are results of an ethical mistake. And this is why Meyendorff goes so far as to say that the Synodicon in Byzantine theology represents a complete rejection of all of those Platonic views of the fall of man, and the acceptance of the Hebrew biblical view of man, that man fell because of an ethical problem, not of an epistemic and metaphysical problem in his being.
So, tying back to, I found this interesting. I didn't have it in I couldn't put everything on my paper, but talking about the golem. And Voegelin identifies this with all these kinds of projects. So socialism, that's what's so funny is we'll start to see that you have Christians saying that supporting socialism. Mm-hmm. Once you actually kind of understand it within this context, there's no way that socialism or any of these systems are compatible with Christianity. They're actually anti-Christ.
Yeah, I think at the conference I remember raising this point to your paper, which is that whether you read Nietzsche and his idea of the Übermensch, or whether you read Che Guevara, they're basically the God-man, the philosophy of the God-man applied to, in Nietzsche's case, the overcoming Superman individual. And in the case of some of the Marxists and communists like Che, the new man is applied to the collective. So the communist workers will become the new man as a collective. And what is the new man? It's the God-man, but it's not the God-man in the sense of the traditional Christian perspective of orthodoxy and the councils. It's the God-man as either an individual Übermensch overcoming through transhumanism or whatever, or the collective Borg hive. And by the way, did you know that Jacques Attali, one of the global elite authors that we've covered in our book series, in Brief History of the Future, he has a whole chapter saying that the myth of the golem will be when everybody's linked into the global brain. He says the global brain is the golem.
So what's interesting in this Kabbalistic story too, did you know that there's two golems?
Adam Kadmon and then the one later on, or what?
Yeah, so the first one is written on his head, Yahweh Elohim Emeth, that God is truth. And now what's interesting on the second golem, and he calls this magic creation. The second golem, so I guess the first golem dies, right? Then the second one's created, and I think, if I remember right, one of them, the letters is scratched out. So it doesn't say that God is truth.
Okay, no, I didn't know this. I thought you were talking about. Okay, go ahead.
This is really interesting. With the effacing, once you cross out Aleph, it doesn't read God is truth. It reads God is dead. Did you know that? In the second golem, they crosses out, and he has the knife.
No, I
in his
didn't
hand,
know that.
right? Yeah. So after this deed, the second golem does not die as his predecessor. Now you can tie this all onto AI too. It remains standing there. The knife is used for the murder in its hand. It goes on living and bears the new seal, the mark of man, mark of the beast, on his brow. And well, what does this all have to do with, right? Well, it ties into that Nietzschean, well, what happens when you kill God?
Man becomes God.
Is the sound still bad?
It's just like your amp, like the amp is really high now. Your static.
Because my wife's telling me to turn up the amp, and people are telling me you're telling me to turn it down.
Well, maybe can you do volume up in that?
Yeah, volume's all the way up.
And then that.
What I could do is bring volume down in that, and then no, it should be better to have volume up.
Right, and amp down.
And amp down. I'm not gonna listen to my wife. No, not in this, because I think she's giving me contradictory information. Wouldn't be the first time. No, I'm kidding, sweetheart. Just on this, I can't figure it out because we get so many people saying different stuff. It's hard to. Jay says it's good.
What are these people in the chat talking about that I don't actually believe in the Trinity? Like, what are you talking about? We just did an entire 2-hour stream on the Trinity. Just ban that guy. Get rid of him. He's total nonsense. Get out of here.
Okay, so back to, remember Nietzsche says if we.
They're saying you're really good now. They're saying your sound is really good now.
Okay, sounds really good. All right. My wife's saying good too. All right. So this is represented in the golem. Now, what does the golem, the second golem, actually do? Right? He becomes undeath, right? By killing God, he becomes God. Now, I think that that's really important. You start to see this in all these kind of Gnostic systems, right? There is the removal of God, right? The death of God. And then there's the attempt to become the Ubermensch, to become God.
Yes.
And then construct that, but then hide the sin. Right? So when you build that certain thing, and Voegelin's going to talk about this.
Could I give an example real quick of that? Because
yes,
I have a couple books by modern day, quote, Kabbalists. One of whom is a woman and a physicist, by the way. And she goes to some of the texts that we would consider messianic prophecies, like Ezekiel 1 and Ezekiel 10, where you have the Son of Man riding on the chariot. And of course, originally the idea of what Kabbalistic mysticism is Merkavah, which is the chariot mysticism of Ezekiel. That's supposedly the origins of it. And, you know, I know going back to Abraham and oral tradition and all that. But in terms of what we call medieval Kabbalistic mythology and stories, they will say that the chariot riding Son of Man in those texts is the individual Kabbalist who has achieved apotheosis. So through ritual magic, it's the individual Kabbalist that can rise up this chain of being. And by the way, somebody influenced by Kabbalism who was a famous ritual magician and spy, John Dee, said the exact same thing. If you read Dame Frances Yates' book, Rosicrucian Enlightenment, in the first chapter, she has a whole section on John Dee and how John Dee had adopted this Kabbalistic idea that the individual ritual magus is through this ladder of ascent, right? Through knowledge, through gnosis, attaining godhood. So again, it's not the orthodox doctrine of theosis, whereby submitting your will to God and morally aligning yourself with Christ and morally aligning yourself to the teaching of the church, by which you then participate in divine life. No. It's none of that. It's just attainment of knowledge and secrets and, the secret codes of the universe and all this kind of nonsense. That's what's going to give you like technological salvation.
By the way, does that sound better?
No.
I switched something.
I'm sure the audience can tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. What you were saying. So part of the idea then, when you build a system, so God's no longer present. You must become God. You must order the universe. You must make the utopia here on Earth. But again, what's really important is, what is philosophy? Philosophia, love of wisdom. What is science? Scientia, epistemic, knowledge. And as you and I talk about, knowledge can only be knowledge if there's a necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge, which is God. So if you commit this Nietzschean deicide, then philosophy, there is no more wisdom, you killed it. There is no more science or knowledge. So, because you no longer have the necessary conditions for the possibility of knowledge. So what you have to do then is conceal that sin. Philosophy is, you build the system so that, I like to use the analogy of an operating system where you can't run certain programs, namely questioning the grounds of what makes science actually science or knowledge. You have to hide it.
Did you change your sound? I mean, everybody was saying it was fine a minute ago, and whatever you did different has made it worse. Sorry. So can you go back to what it was? They said you touched something and it got bad. So.
Okay. All right, better. I'm so sorry about this, guys. Now, if I lower that, is that a little bit better?
The problem is I can't. Let me have to go to the app and see what, because the chat's like a minute behind, so I don't know what.
I know that's part of the problem too. So it could be if the volume levels are okay.
I'm gonna have to listen to the mods because I can't trust any of these other people. They're a bunch of trolls in here. So mods, I'm not gonna be listening to anybody else. Is the sound good?
It sound good.
I'm looking at the up-to-date chat.
Sound good. My cat says it is. He's out there crying. Come on, buddy. Speak right now into the mic. Because I want to know, is it a problem of volume? Now, remember, if you put too high a volume, sometimes the quality will go down.
Yeah,
So
see, I know what they're saying. I know what they're saying because when I listen to you on my computer through Zoom, you sound perfect. But when I listen to you on the stream, it sounds still like you're distant in a tin can.
Huh.
They're saying you're really quiet.
All right, I'll just crank up the... Problem is, usually when you crank up volume, the quality can go down.
The mods are saying you just sound distant, right? So
distant.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. 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 I don't know. I don't think we're ever gonna fix this.
We'll just have to go with what we got. This is as good as we can do. I mean.
So it sounds tin canny.
To me, you sound perfect. On the stream, you sound like you're in a tin can.
I don't understand that. Doesn't make any sense. Okay, what can I do?
We'll just carry on. We've already gone this far, so.
I'll just do like this. Is that better? Does it sound more tin canny?
That actually sounds better. I mean, can you move that mic closer to you, or? You don't have to kiss the mic.
I'm eating it. I'm starving. Okay, I'll just talk like this. Okay. So one of the things that I found fascinating, though, is that Voegelin has said, like in National Socialism, Marxism, Hegelianism, and these different things, they construct a system. I call it an operating system that conceals and makes it so that you can't actually ask any questions. One of those is what makes this system legitimate, what makes it knowledge or philosophy rather than philodoxy. That can't be asked, because then it'll reveal the murder. It'll reveal what you're actually doing. He calls it the swindle, right? Marx and Hegel has the swindle.
Mm-hmm.
And that one instance of this too is that certain questions other questions are practically or conceptually impossible. So if you think back, he cites this in the text, that when the SS officer is at the Nuremberg and he's just asked, why didn't you refuse the orders? And he said, that's not possible. I think all of us thought that it wasn't possible, like he didn't have the courage to do something like that. But Voegelin comments that it wasn't a reality.
Mm-hmm.
The system had constructed itself in such a way that it was almost like he didn't know how to process that. It's like, I don't understand what you're saying. That reality was not possible. That, for example, in the fall of communism, when people went over to translate books, they found anything associated with kind of a concept of the I, of the individual, was very, very difficult to translate. Because the reality wasn't there. The system had constructed such that those kinds of realities and questions weren't possible. They were concealed. They weren't suppressed, in as much as so much suppressed is the operating system didn't allow it. It just wasn't there. And we all work on an operating system. And so why is this important? And this is where I made the tie into the Kufid, is that I started realizing that the same thing was happening. And I'd also say this in conjunction with what was going on politically that we've been going through. You know, why is it intelligent people just can't think through certain kind of issues? Is it being suppressed? You know, is it just like we say, like, you know, they're just brainwashed? I think it's more than that. I think that we're living in a Gnostic operating system that makes those questions impossible. And so, for example, with trust the experts, trust the science, right? And if you question that, those questions aren't even possible in their mind. It's like, how could you? So more so than just simply being suppressed. And we'll talk about like suppression tactics and like social feeling, group thinking that Saint Simon Comte talked about will be useful in kind of putting forward these kind of Gnostic systems. But once you have this kind of, and I make the point that science doesn't exist in a vacuum, it exists in historically situated in a certain socio-political paradigm and must be understood as such. And this is what's going on right now. We live in a modern technocratic system that's atheistic, that's committed Nietzschean deicide. And man now is the measure of all things. And he will construct the system, and he will hide that his science is no longer science, and that philosophy is no longer philosophy, that's philodoxy, by constructing that system, by making that. That is a Gnostic move. Anyways,
Right.
I'll talk a little bit about that some more, but if you wanted to kind of pick up on that.
Well, I liked where you moved into the section talking about the global elite. I actually didn't expect your paper to talk about that. I mean, I knew you and I had been talking about the writings of the elite and Brzezinski, but you brought in something I'd never heard of, which was a Edward Bellamy novel, utopian novel called Looking Backward. Yes. And then, of course, I knew about James Burnham's Managerial Society, but you also brought in Russell, Arthur Koestler, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Max Weber, Karl Mannheim, all of these figures positing this technocratic order, which really does back up Voegelin's whole point, right? That the logic of fallen man's attempt to construct and create not just ideal philosophy systems, but world systems that work in the world,
Yes.
right? Coming out of Auguste Comte and Saint Simon, their positivism and their attempt to create the civic order, a fake civic religion, to use the panopticon to create what all the dystopian
Great
right.
word, panopticon. That's exactly what.
Yeah, like H.G. Wells is basically communist, socialist, Marxist global government, the new order, would be influenced by Bentham and the prison system of the panopticon, right? To create everybody in this global panopticon where they're self-policing and surveilled, so that they self-police.
Yeah, and remember, that's why the beginning of the paper opens up with, it's not that the ancients lacked knowledge to develop technology. They had it. But their orientation and their pursuits were fundamentally different.
Mm-hmm.
Their highest concerns had to do with theology.
Mm-hmm.
And the order of being in your natural place within that. They would never cut against the grain of nature or use or develop their technology beyond. They would impede their pursuits of God in the intelligible order of nature and things like that. But once you remove that, what's left? There's nothing to. That's why Voegelin and Dr. Foltz talks about that. Then nature is just an exploitation, and all that's left is will to power, libido dominandi, and that. But then I have to tie that into, in order to get where we're at, then that ideology has to relate to industrialization in a specific way. So that's actually going to be the connection that's going to usher in technology, technocracy, and then lead to. So you have all these things kind of coming together, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
That the state. This is what drives me crazy, and this is something that libertarians will never understand. They're still operating this old assumption that like the state's the highest power. We could just fix that and get rid of. But as John Gunnell points out, that, well, the state has been replaced by the technical experts.
Yeah, right.
That the state is just a function of that
Right.
at best.
The state is already owned by the corporations and the banks. So,
in fact, he states, in circumstances which political decisions necessarily involve specialized knowledge, the exercise of technical skills, political power tends to gravitate toward technological elites. Okay, so think about what just happened this last year with the coup and the politics. Who is making the decisions?
technocrats.
The technocrats.
Oh, we got to get those numbers down.
Exactly. Now, number two, technology has become autonomous from politics. Hence, politics has become a function of epistemic structural determinants over which it has little or no control.
Exactly.
It's a facade. Like, so it's so silly that people are investing all this stuff into politics, all their time and energy, when what's really going on is the technocracy. And the technocracy and technology now constitute a new legitimating ideology that subtly masks certain forms of social domination. So you have to understand that in terms of what they actually believe in their ideologies, and again, how that actually evolved out of this history that we've been going through, modernity and Enlightenment. And it drives me crazy that people, like, you actually do the scholarly work and figure this stuff out, and people call you a conspiracy. Oh, that's all conspiracy theory.
Okay. I mean, they all write open books about it. So if you want to say that, go ahead. But anybody who says that, I'm just gonna start listing the books and say, well, have you read this? Have you read this? Have you read this? Have you read this? So I'm gonna hit them with the gnosis. I'm gonna give them a gnosis test, and if they don't pass the gnosis multiple choice, then
oh man, check that out, bro. You inoculating them with knowledge.
Right.
Knowledge.
So
Y'all coming up here for inoculations?
Right.
Get some of the knowledge.
Have you read Friedrich Capra? Have you read Tragedy and Hope? Have you read Anglo-American Establishment? Have you read Alex Abaya? Have you read Jonas Salk? Have you read David Rockefeller? Have you read Jacques Attali? Have you read Klaus Schwab? Have you read Zbigniew Brzezinski? Have you read Miles Copeland? And I guarantee you, anybody who says that this doesn't exist has not read one of the books on that
exactly
list. Have you read S.G. Wells?
Well, part of this, notice what I was just talking about. What does the Gnostic system do? So to bring these books up is to bring up the right type of questions.
Yeah.
But the system must conceal that. Right?
And not allow you to ask these questions. Exactly.
So one of them is to come up with conspiracy theory, because that just shuts down all conversation. That's exactly what Voegelin means, that it's actually certain questions are practically and conceptually impossible.
Yeah.
Because the system built it that way.
Yeah, you can't even ask those questions is the way you put it.
And I like that a lot better than it's... Because we typically think that things just being like suppression, like you're being not allowed. But it's better to think about it in this way. The system is built not to allow it. And that might use certain kind of words. And I always call them kind of spell words, because we have the things with racisms and all these other kind of words. And what you notice about, and we talked about this at the conference, all these words are devoid of content. There's no real meaning what a racist is. It's not meant to convey meaning. It's meant to cast a spell and have dominion over you, like a spell would, right? That it's control, it's libido dominandi. Well, the same thing with a conspiracy. If you ask somebody like, well, what exactly is it? What exactly do you have in mind? There is no coherent or clear, unambiguous notion of that. It's contentless. It doesn't matter. It's a spell word.
Right. And then
it's not to convey information.
I mean, on the law books, there's a whole thing you could be convicted of called criminal conspiracy. So we're supposed to believe that only goes on at a local level, but there's never anything going on at a big level, right? That doesn't exist. Yeah, because really rich people are good and virtuous. They don't do criminal conspiracies. It's only the mid to lower level people that commit.
Well, you know what you get is this kind of false dichotomy that...
Well, don't you know... you couldn't be hold on. You can't be a billionaire or trillionaire without being virtuous. How else?
That's right.
How else would they be? They got there through hard work, determination, and civic virtue. There's no other way to become a billionaire.
Well, I think the two things, they straw man what the position actually is, and then they think in kind of a false dichotomy. So they'll typically think that. So you're telling me there's a handful of men.
Yeah.
That control it all.
Everything, right? and they're in communion with the aliens. They're in communion with aliens.
They're evil and responsible. Well, I like to actually think that there's a heart of darkness that goes through every man. And this is really... So they'll already put in this kind of dialectic that it's an either or. That like really it's just kind of more... Or is it...
That's true.
Planned,
yeah, reality. Yeah, reality isn't complex or nuanced. It's either this absurd view of a Mount Olympus gathering of the syndicate of elites who run everything, or the world just is one damn thing after another.
So yeah, it's a lack of nuance too, and it doesn't even have to be that organized. I mean, look at the way organized crime. I know you're doing some stuff like that too. I'm sure there's competing, kind of groups.
And there's levels. There's levels and layers to this, right? I mean, think about just in the realm of organized crime. There's the street thug, right? Does the street thug have the same degree of power and influence and money and wealth as a made man in the mob or one of the dons of the families. Of course not.
So what do you think about these normies that, I mean, I feel like this, both with the politics, the science, the Kufid, people say, well, things just, aren't they just as they appear? I mean, there's something beyond the surface that's actually, I mean, that sounds insane, right? You sound like a madman. But isn't that the whole task of philosophy? That there's the way things appear, and then there's the way things really are.
Exactly.
And it's the task of the philosopher to go beyond the realms of appearance,
yes,
and be very aggressive in their questioning to get down to the bottom.
That's what led Socrates to be put to death by Athens.
Killed him. So we're noticing the same thing going on here, right? What happens if you actually and all you want to know is actually the truth. You want to know if the science is actually good science, if this is a good philosophy, if this is good politics. And you're immediately shamed. You're ostracized. You're even threatened, right? I guess you could be jailed or something like that. No, things are just the way they are, and the way they appear to be. Like, how could you be a conspiracy theorist and think? That is another sign of a Gnostic system. It's built to conceal the questioning, and all the time pretending to be science and philosophy. That's the swindle there.
Another thing too is Gnosticism and a lot of the systems functioned on a compartmentalization basis. So you had to kind of move up the structure to know what the hierophants or the elect or the leaders of the sect really knew, right? There's the real mysteries. And really the intelligence world operates that way. The criminal world operates that way. That's one of the things that we learn with the mob system is that the organized crime system was set up so that the bosses wouldn't get busted, because anytime you busted the people, the soldiers and the people actually doing the criminal stuff, they didn't even know who the bosses were. Like, so, because it went up a chain that was kind of a secret chain. And that goes back to the fact that the mafia structure was influenced by and came out of the Masonic circles of Garibaldi, who was influenced by Giuseppe Mazzini, who was one of the top. He was kind of the Albert Pike of Italy, Giuseppe Mazzini. So, and I say that because if you read Pike, right, Pike says the same thing in the structure of Morals and Dogma for the Lodge. He says that the lower members are intentionally kept from the true secrets, and they're even misled, right? So they're told these other reasons why the lodge exists and why they're learning these different rituals and rites and virtues and whatnot, so-called virtues, so-called. And so, so that compartmentalization is another way to deflect and not allow the right questions to even be asked.
So, I mean, if that's possible at the mafia level, I mean, think about the wealthiest people in the entire world.
Or think about how the military works. The military works on compartmentalization of knowledge.
Right. And so that's, again, I wanted to tie this all in because particularly seeing what's disturbing is Christians and Orthodox Christians falling into the system and saying trust science, you're a conspiracy theorist if you think you want to kill people, if you don't care about this. And I like to think about it this way. This is a good introspective exercise. What methodology, if you were in National Socialist regime and you were told that such and such is science and that we've got to do this, what special insight or methodology would you have that no other people seem to, or at least the enormous majority, had no access to, that you would have to know, wait a minute, science is being corrupted here. I don't think this is actually scientific or philosophic. And then ask yourself, how do I know that I'm not in a similar system right now? And what would be my unique method and mechanism for determining that. Nobody ever asked that question
Mm.
because they just assume, well, we don't live in that. It's, you know, what's called this kind of American exceptionalism.
Yeah.
That, well, aren't we all just, isn't the nation founded on Christianity and brotherly love and trust and kind of egalitarianism and equality for all, classical liberalism, guys? I mean, how could anything like that happen? And then once you start to realize you study the ideas, and Jay had pointed out all those books too, and authors are really good, all scholarly works, and then locate what's going on philosophically throughout the history of ideas, then you realize we're exactly in the same system. Maybe I'd say worse. We're far worse in the system that we're living in right now than the Germans were in the 30s. Because I think it would be easier. You didn't have the kind of technology that we have now. Because once you hook up the kind of World Wide Web, and once you kind of have, and you and I talked about this too, the simula and the sim world, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the what we always
Simulation theory.
Yeah.
Simulation, simulacra by Baudrillard.
Yeah, we don't live in a real world. We live in remember what the Gnostics tried to create a dream world. It's an artificial reality, and that makes manipulation quite easy of information. And I always thought about this too. Marshall McLuhan.
Marshall McLuhan?
Yeah, and then also Jean-Claude Larcher does a lot on his new social media based on McLuhan's work, Marshall McLuhan. And one of the things that's interesting is just the amount of information that we're processing, the kind of world that, again, everything's just an inventory. So to answer the question, why should we make this or do this? It's because we can. It's no longer about ends, it's all means. The medium is the message. And so, in times past, if somebody told me your neighbor's house is on fire, well, how would I verify that? You'd go look. And I probably knew very little of what was going on in the next town, let alone another nation or something like that. But now what happens is we're all artificially connected in a sim world. So, and bombarded with the overload of information about the entire world. We're all connected, instantaneous. All the information's instantaneous. There is no way that I can go through all of that and kind of fact check like I can my neighbor. Well, that makes us quite prone. We're already in an artificial environment, a dream world. It's not real, so it can be manipulated. And then there's so much information I can't possibly check. It makes it quite prone to manipulation. I think that's something that the technocracy are making use of, and we're seeing it exactly going on with the quote-unquote science, aren't we?
Yeah, Videodrome, exactly.
Anyway, sorry for the rant. Go ahead.
No, I was just, once again, trying to fix the audio. Let's see, where do we get to? System building.
What if it's the Gnostics are true and the problem isn't me, but you guys in the chat? It's the world, it's the chat world that's disordered, not Jay and I.
Maybe you could speak to this one. So I'm looking through the notes that I wrote when you presented your paper. Could you speak to the issue where Postman brings up, there's a good Neil Postman quote, and you talk about there's a link between scientism and technocracy. What does it mean to say that the scientific method cannot justify the scientific method, or that the scientific method cannot be questioned or justified? It just must be accepted.
Let's see here. Neil Postman. All right, so one of the things that, and this is what leads to scientism, you have to have this belief there is no other form of knowing.
Good point.
But the empirical kind of knowing, the empiricism, and that the methods of natural sciences, the empirical method, can be applied to all areas of life. Well, obviously this is reminiscent of the logical positivists, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the only things that are meaningful or true is those that could be verified empirically.
Quantified and yeah, empirically verified, yeah.
But that statement can't be verified empirically.
Right. How do you empirically verify the scientific method itself?
That's a grounding question, because if that's your first principle, you want to ground that, okay? But if my project is I only allow for empirically verifiable things, then the very grounding statement of what would make that possible can't actually be done in that program.
Mm-hmm.
So what do? You conceal it. That's why he says it's another Gnostic form. That's Scientism. Is that you cannot use the empirical sciences, to justify the empirical sciences. What justifies the empirical sciences? Well, Vogelin's going to argue God does. Right? If there's any knowledge in science, it's got to be because there's a unique and necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge. But Scientism doesn't allow for that. That was kind of, and I think Postman was talking around or about that as well.
Exactly. But that's an important point, because the whole world really, all of modernity, all the modern world believes this dogma. They believe that really that's the only type of knowledge that we can have, or that's valuable, or that anyone has. Everything else is just kind of opinion or mysticism, and rational, quote, scientific knowledge is knowledge proper. That's it. But when you start to talk about grounding and the scientific method itself, 99.9% of the people that believe that cannot give you an account for the scientific method itself. It just is, right? Remember the Matt Dillahunty debate. It just is, right? Logic just is. Reason just is. Scientific method just is. It's the best we've got. It just is. Yeah, but that's not a justification. That's not a grounding for or giving account for the starting point, the claim that we're talking about here.
Oh, here's a good quote from Lancelletti concerning that view that basically Scientism is the view of science is the only true knowledge. And he's going to say that inevitably leads to a type of totalitarianism. Now, it's interesting because my PhD thesis advisor had actually brought up an objection that, well, wait a minute, and I was actually quoting Lancelletti here. He said, but the positivists and their fallibilism were far more active in resisting totalitarian regimes like the Nazis than Rome and other metaphysical realists. Now, I never said that a Gnostic system can't, or logical positivists, or, naturalists, metaphysical anti-realists is one way to call naturalists, can't ever resist a totalitarian regime, or, might be the only ones at a particular time that do speak up against a totalitarian regime. The point that Lancelletti is making is that this ideology itself will become totalitarian. Because that doesn't mean that just because I speak up. Well, look at this. Didn't the Nationalist Socialists speak up against the communists? We could make the same argument. Well, therefore, you're not going to conclude, well, therefore, National Socialism had no notion of totalitarianism in it. That seems not to follow. Now, why does scientism, and I would argue this kind of naturalism and anti-metaphysical realism that would say the only true knowledge is a view of science, right? Science is the only true knowledge. empirical, with the positives, that is inevitably going to lead to totalitarianism, because, as Lancelotti says, an advocate of scientism, the view I just described, in a society based on his way of thinking, which is what we're living in right now, cannot help being totalitarian inasmuch as his conception of science cannot be the object of any proof. He does not intend to elevate other forms of thought to a higher level, but he simply denies them. So that's tying that back into that grounding question. Well, how do I know that's knowledge? That's not allowed, because that's not an empirical question. So we've got to create a society that there's an either we suppress it purposely, or we create an operating system where people can't even think that question. That's kind of my point there. And you will use social feeling, groupthink, shame, all these different things through media, education, social media, politics, cooperation, corporations, the state, banks, all of this to do that kind of social domination.
Yeah, it was that not allowing the questions to be asked reminds me of an issue that we were discussing. I don't remember who it was. It was somebody else a couple of years ago, but we were talking about how the way the system is structured today, it kind of excludes the possibility of, in most people's thought process, they don't even have certain questions in that process. Like the idea that there could be, let's take Darwinism. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that Darwinism is false. Most people wouldn't even consider that a question possible to ask, because they don't consider in their worldview that that's even possible. So possibility and what is possible is kind of already determined by what you believe, right? So, for example, a lot of people think that anything, quote, supernatural is impossible. So their worldview from the outset excludes anything like that even being part of their worldview. So in the same way, that's another way to, I'm just thinking of like, so could there be an international plan to bring in a technocracy? No, because that's not even a valid question, because there's not even the framework in most people's worldview to consider that as something even possible.
You know what's interesting? Think about the way that we do trying to derive philosophical principles, legal principles. I'd even say good science, right? If you think in the sense of kind of like falsification, that you try to build your theory as easily falsifiable as possible. Well, in philosophy, what we do is you assume the very worst, right? Situation, like, I'm not an advocate of Descartes, but you see that he's using a similar methodology where let's assume that it's all deception. And what could I know in that situation? Could I get... Well, I'm wondering why not actually kind of think about this way? Why... if we want to figure out whether something's actually good science, let's assume the very worst of the people in control. That they have... that's kind of what I'm asking about, like, compare yourself to you being somebody in National Socialism. How would you know? Because I'm trying to get somebody to derive a principle that, because in the worst case scenario, if it works there, then in the things that are a little, not as bad, it's a bit convoluted, but that principle is going to hold, correct? Now, what's funny is that you'll get people respond, well, that's just assuming the worst of people. How dare you? You're just assuming the worst of your opponent. Now, I think, given what we went through, the history, and knowing what the ideologies and philosophies and the anti-humanistic, right, anti-God and anti-human philosophies these people hold to were justified. But I think just pragmatically, it's a good it's a good thought experiment. Assume the very worst. That, like, these people are absolutely evil and they want to, do just the most evil things. How would you be able to know science is science?
Yeah, science can't give you values, right? There's no possibility of more and more data actually giving you a value. I like that you move on to talk about science versus scientism, and really that. Oh wait, I skipped ahead too far. Excuse me. No, I didn't. Science is theory laden. That's what I was wanted to get to next, which is the, this is something we bring up a lot in the Transcendental Argument, the presuppositional analysis, is that there's not a neutral platform where science is on neutral ground and it can just look at the data and then can tell us based on quantification and rational analysis, so-called, just looking at the logic and the facts, what the right and wrong course of action is. That's right. Actually impossible, right? Again, you can't get an ought from an is. Science can really only tell you what things are the case. It can give a kind of functional advantage to making things work, quote, better. But whether something works better or worse, or something is in fact better or worse, is again a value judgment. And science can't tell you what the better or the worse actually is, right? So this is the point, that science is itself theory laden, and that's what a lot of people can't seem to figure out.
And we have to, this is where we run into a lot of the problems, that people have this kind of evidentialist, or it's just self-evident. By the way, reading through all the modern Enlightenment political philosophers, I told my class, beware of the man who uses self-evident. They have used that term to justify the most atrocious things and perverse. Well, it's just self-evident. I mean, everybody knows that.
We all know that's right. Yeah.
It's self-evident that man's was born into a state of nature and that he's not a social animal, that it's an artificial construct. It's self-evident that we're all. Well, it's only self-evident to that philosopher and their cronies. It's hilarious. And then they always...
Yeah, exactly.
What the thing about self-evident, it's like another Gnostic swindle. Why? Because if you go, well, wait a minute, why is that self-evident? You can't ask that question.
You can't ask that question.
That would mean that there was an argument behind it, and this is self-evident, which means there are no justifications of argument. That's your first principle.
Yes, grant me my presupposition. Grant me my presuppositions and my argument, and I'll prove my case.
And all these philosophers use it with first, it's self-evident. It's a first principle that, and Dante Germino brings this out too. It's like Locke doesn't justify it. None of them justify their self-evident. Mm-hmm. Why? Because, well, if you had to justify it, it would no longer be self-evident. And so there's the great swindle. Yeah. You're all just taken for a ride.
Yeah, and that's why David Hume is so great to point out. Is again,
David Hume does the exact same.
Well, he does the same thing, but he's more consistent.
He's able to identify in other people too.
Well, he's able to admit that it's inconsistent. So that's the thing about Hume, is that he's more consistent than all the other atheists, because he admits that they are inconsistent.
Yeah, we just covered him as well, and I think the students really like that. But let's go back to this idea, this naivism, that we'll just look at the facts. We'll just collect all the data from the medical, and we could just all look at it. It's just theory neutral. There's no bias or manipulation. It's just the facts. And we just crunch the numbers, right? I mean, it's just the methodology that we do. And then we just get this apodictic kind of certainty. Plug it into the formula, and it pops out. And then we know exactly if it's a crisis, it's an epidemic, and what's going on. And then how can you deny that? Well, that is to ignore that, again, there's nothing that's theory neutral. That we all bring. So to do good science, you already have to know that. That it's paradigm contaminated. It's bias contaminated. It's, nothing's theory neutral. So you can't do science and actually determine whether something, quote quote unquote is relatively to the system factual unless you already are aware of paradigmatic contamination of the possibilities thereof. Nobody's doing that. They've fallen into scientism. There is no other analysis. It's what the experts say. You can't question that. It's just data. It's just all quantifiable data. And there's none of this kind of epistemological questions of grounding and paradigm questions, no philosophy of science. Why do you think that the big scientists, Tyson, Krauss, why do you think they all hate philosophy of science? They're philosophers of science.
Because that's precisely the questions that they can't answer, and that's why they don't want anyone asking those questions. And so they have to. I mean, this is why Neil deGrasse Tyson explicitly says, "Throw away philosophy; it's useless."
Yes, right. So he's a Gnostic. So we illustrate once again. Now,
And this is interesting. This isn't just a side point. The tension that you often see in the atheist scientism crowd is what, to give credit to Van Til, he recognized a long time ago, the tension back and forth between ultimate rationality and ultimate irrationality. So on the one hand, their system is complete, it's rational, it's evidence-based, it's factual, it's consistent, it's not superstitious, and yet at the same time, out of the same other side of their mouth, they'll say, we don't do philosophy. We don't care about coherence. We don't care about systemic thinking. We don't care about the philosophy of science and those questions. We just don't even ask those questions. So that's a radical back and forth between, on the one hand, playing the game of pretending that they're completely rational and complete in their system and their philosophy, and then turning around and being completely, totally irrational.
Yeah, great point. I was trying to find.
Van Til was great at calling that out about how the unbeliever will constantly shift back and forth, kind of like behind two different masks of the universe is completely rational and perfectly coherent and explainable, and then everything is pure chaos, nonsense, nihilism, meaninglessness, and they will play that game back and forth all the time. And if a big job of apologetics is really just calling out that duplicitous back and forth game that the unbelieving atheist type person is playing.
Voegelin talks about this too. Where is it? They're really actually doing non-science and will always use. So there's that kind of tension, right? They'll play the game on the surface. And always they're doing non-science, but they're always calling it science. And I think that's kind of you highlighted that too. It's this back and forth. That's why it's magic. That's where it's a magic recreation. This is going back to the Kabbalism and stuff like that, and the alchemy, and it has all of that. Actually has a really interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, we could give some credence here to this point about, they will literally believe in magical things, like something can come from nothing, right? Like they would laugh at you for believing that Christ could do a miracle or whatever, but they actually believe that the whole universe just popped into existence from nothing. Out of nothing, Big Bang, right? So they constantly do.
A particle is both there and not there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Quantum foam. There's a multiverse where I'm a LARPing God King dragon, right? I mean, literally everything is possible.
It's literally mythology.
It is, and
that's why they're not even innovative. Like I'm telling you, every scientific discovery is already in the ancients.
Well, the myth of Darwin, right?
Swerve, yeah.
The Darwinist myth is the same as the myth of the Titans, that man is an accidental creation by lightning hitting the dirt, and it accidentally created man. The Titans accidentally created man by war with the gods, and this lightning bolt. Oops, sorry, it hit the mud. Right, that's just the lightning bolt hitting
and you have Empirically too, which is basically like an ancient Darwin.
Yeah, ancient Hinduism, ancient Egyptian philosophy, ancient Greek philosophy all has the same magical ideas of the neo-Darwinian systems, which things just pop into being, right? Consciousness just pops into being.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we can't actually do good science, or that we never do it. What I want, and I think, Jay, you're pointing this out too, the overall paradigm and the metaphysics, is it a religion, right? All of this stuff. And I want to know, and part of this paper was to get people to think, not that we can never do science or something like that, but is the system as a whole science, and can the science be corrupted? And how would we know? Those should be important questions, but I guess they're going to kill me for asking them. I mean, to be fair, everybody's received it really well.
Yes, your paper's,
But, I mean,
the paper's great.
I haven't given it to Kufid cult members yet, so I don't know what...
Well, the paper's great, but as we know, those people don't like having their presuppositions challenged. So,
well, you know what's kind of funny? What actually kind of inspired me to do this is that, you might be online or something like that, and you're arguing with somebody, and that they're just like, well, that's just kind of a meme argument and stuff. And you actually take the time to, and I did. I spent like over a month, maybe 2 months writing and researching this, and put together an actual argument that goes through the history and makes all the points. And my response from when I've actually given it to Kufid cult members, they're like, so you think you're smarter than me, all these big words? I don't even know what you're talking about. So it doesn't matter what you say. I'm like, they're cult members. I mean, I don't know how to get them out of the system.
okay, so the people are saying for me questioning the transmutation of species, for which there is absolutely no evidence, and in fact there is abundant evidence from DNA and genetics to the contrary. If you question evolution, you're a fool. So notice no arguments, just that you're a fool. So
you're getting this in the chat?
Yeah, so don't dare question the great dogma, right? Of evolutionary
But isn't
philosophy.
that my whole point in this? What constitutes... So I'm coming from this, and Jay, you are as well, from a epistemological kind of motivations and backgrounds. Well, what makes something actually evidence? How do we know that we know certain things? And we're asking about this. So if somebody says, oh, we just know from like the way genetics, we're asking, and I like what Wittgenstein said, the problem with people is they don't put the question mark on far enough. And this is exactly what you're getting. We're asking you if you can actually know that, and you're just saying, well, because a bunch of people wearing white lab coats and they look cool holding Airmar flask and
Bunsen burners and beakers with
they
green liquids.
Obviously got to be right. Is this not illustrating my whole point? It's a cult, dude.
I put on
in a cult.
I did a video where I put on a white coat and glasses, and I had a calculator, so I was pretty damn sciencey. I mean, so are you going to believe me now that I say? I mean, I put on the costume, and I said Darwinism is false. So shouldn't you believe me now?
No, because you got to use the social feeling. That's why Saint Simon Comte.
I should say, well, then we all know Darwinism is false. How about I just do that? It's self-evident.
You know what? If
it's self-evident.
We all started saying it, I guarantee
right.
these people would cave in. Because Saint Simon and Comte are correct. That social feeling. And Michael Polanyi as well talks about this too. The kind of accepted, received. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, he has a good critique of scientism and the.
If we literally got everybody in the TV to tell you it was wrong, you would believe it. Which shows you don't know what you're talking about.
Yep. It doesn't matter if creation is the minority view. It doesn't matter. That's a appeal to consensus fallacy. It literally doesn't matter.
And trust me, I'm an expert because I'm a philosophy scientist. A philosopher, scientist always.
Yeah, that's another. Like, how do you know which category of experts to default to, right? And by the way, what happens when there's a crisis of disagreement amongst experts, as we see today?
That's right. Libido dominandi, the last man. There'll be a battle to the death. That's actually we're gonna have our 2021. We're gonna resolve all philosophical and scientific disputes. A battle to the death. Libido dominandi.
Well, we just need some final great man to step up and complete the system of German idealism, right? As Kant talked about. So
Yeah, right.
maybe you could take upon yourself that project of system building and finally build the great final all-encompassing system.
You people in the chat saying that.
No, we're just smack talking.
If you figured it out, why don't you do it? Why don't you write the paper that synthesizes all of?
No, we just had some Darwin fanatics who were saying that you can't question creationism is a minority view, and only fools question Darwinism. So,
and by the way, majorityism is racist, so you can't actually make that minorities are always correct. So,
I love it how many of the people who are scientism proponents, they don't even know basic fallacies, so that they'll appeal to consensus like that's an argument. They don't even know that they're committed, like they're supposed to be followers of rationality and reason, and yet they constantly commit really basic informal fallacies.
Yep. So thank you for those wonderful illustrations on the chat. That really drove our points home, so I do appreciate it.
Well, everybody be sure and follow Father Deacon. You want to read get to these super chats with me?
Heck yeah, man.
Mick Ale for $10 says, "Good evening, gentlemen. The churches need to reopen. The facial diapers excluded and social distancing included." I agree. John Connor, $5. "How do you know that the Bible wasn't tampered with? I've heard it was 80 books, and now it is reduced to 66 by the Vatican." I don't know if is this a serious comment or a troll comment. Nag Hammadi was discovered in the 50s. Wouldn't that be more accurate? So multiple mistakes in this question. I'm not trying to be rude to you, John Connor, but for one, the way that we know the Bible is not tampered with is that there are 5,000 plus manuscripts from the first 3 or 4 centuries. Secondly,
you can compare, which means you can compare them and actually see if they were tampered with.
Yeah, and I mean they have a large amount of consistency amongst them. There are some typo, scribal errors, but we also have the traditional Byzantine text, which is another testament to the preservation of the text, which is normative for us as Orthodox. I'm not aware of 80 books. The Vatican did not reduce the Bible to 66 books. So you are confusing that with the Protestant canon of Scripture. The Nag Hammadi texts are Gnostic texts and do not relate to the biblical canonical text. So I would say go read, I'm not trying to be rude, just saying go read like a basic account of the history of the canon of Scripture from any recognized scholar like Lee McDonald, and you would see that, and again, I'm not being mean to you, John Connor, I appreciate the question, but all 3 of the questions that you asked are pretty incorrect. John Connor, $5. "Have you read Ted Kaczynski's manifesto?" I'm familiar with his manifesto. I haven't read the whole thing, but I know what he says about technology and all that.
Ted Kaczynski's cabin's just an hour away from me too.
Yeah, Father Deacon spends his weekends out there at Ted's cabin, so.
Yeah, so I can tell you all about that.
Now, he explains how technology will usurp every culture and usher in the world system. Yes, but ultimately it will fail. Correct. AI seems to be the AI seems to be the Antichrist ushering in a false system under God's earth system. I don't think that the Antichrist is AI. I think the Antichrist is a human figure that ends up being born and possessed whenever the end times are. We could be in the end times. I don't claim to know. And certainly if we are in the end times, I'm sure an AI system could be used by the Antichrist, but I don't think the Antichrist is AI. But thank you for that.
Anybody that knows anything who's watched The Omen would know that.
Yeah, dude, haven't you seen Rosemary's Baby? The Antichrist is a lizard baby. Noé Contreras, $5. "How do we fight back against all the stuff that you talk about, such as the elites, the occult, social engineering?" Well, the Orthodox Church is how we fight back. We don't construct our own, political revolutionary system. Should we expect things to come to some kind of global war conflict, mass civil unrest? Considering, I'm sure that those things will come. I don't know when. I mean, civil unrest is already happening. 2020, 2019, there was a lot of civil unrest. So, yeah, and I'm sure there will be more civil unrest in the future.
Now we're bombing people.
the Bible says it will only get worse. Well, I mean, there will be, I mean, if we're in the last days, yeah, but there could also be 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years. We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So, Gen Z philosophy, $5. I'll give you my opinion on this, and then I'll let Father Deacon answer this because he is a member of the clergy and I'm not. But Gen Z asks, is anger itself a blameless passion? If not, then how are we to understand Christ's anger, such as getting mad at the money changers in the Gospels? Well, I don't believe that it's always a blameful passion. I think that anger is a blameless passion in some instances. And so there's many biblical cases where we do have the mentioning of righteous anger. But that's a little bit of a trickier question, because how do we know when we aren't just angry out of prideful reasons and when it's a legitimate reason? Father Deacon, what would you say to this question?
Well, remember you and I were having a talk about this in terms of energeia, that, and even there's the demons can be said to have energeia, but that's really strange because evil's not not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Energeia is actually being, and we talked about that everything as being is good. So we even have activity energeia, but it can be misdirected.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's bears a lot on the whole question of like anger too. That I don't think anger per se as an energeia is bad. It's misdirected anger.
Okay, that's
being anger at the having that energy at the wrong time at the wrong place.
Okay.
And how do we know? Well, that's really difficult because it isn't formulaic. That is.
There's not a one-size-fits-all answer to every situation. Yeah, there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to every situation as to what to do.
And it comes from a state of character. In ethics, the right action comes from, because action cheris energeia, like use is cheris, energeia is like the activity, comes from hexis, like a state of the soul. So we have to be appropriately in the correct state, appropriately souledness, and in order to have that kind of discernment. And that takes we know how to do that, what the prescriptions are in orthodoxy. But that takes a long time. It's a lot of practice to get the state of our soul correctly. So we make mistakes, but yeah, that doesn't mean that simply, being angry is always wrong at all places. Sometimes it's right. We're not supposed to always be effeminate, as some people want to present.
Yeah, right. Panos Kostoros 333. Thank you. Good stream, guys. I'm sorry if this is too low IQ of a question, but would you consider the whole social construct assertion on common sense human categories and experiences to be a Gnostic perversion? Yes, ultimately the idea that every human category and experience as a social construct is Gnostic, because it's just like a pure subjectivist relativism, right? So if everything is a human social construct, then, by the way, it's self-refuting, because even the proposition that everything is a human social construct would also be a social construct. So that would be self-refuting. But aside from the self-refutation, is it Gnostic? Yeah, because ultimately it just ends in solipsism and Gnosticism, right? It's very amenable to the idea that everything's just a projection of your mind. What do you think?
Good. Yeah, and that's not, you just bumped up your IQ points by asking that question. So I give you 5 IQ points.
You won 5 IQ points for that. John Connor, again, $5. I have Carl Jung's Red Book, which has a snake drawing hiding under a flat earth, trying to tempt man to pull him under into a shadow. When women lay on their bellies, their anatomy is almost identical to a snake mouth. Well, I would say that those are tangential, tenuous connections. So just because something looks like something doesn't mean there's a necessary connection between them, right?
No, it's
depends on what you mean.
No.
Now, I do know that, Carl Jung's Red Book was definitely an attempt to create a Gnostic system or to inscribe his dreams and visions into his Gnostic system or whatever. But I wouldn't read too much into thinking that the actual cosmology of the world and metaphysical structure of the world is somehow given to you in Carl Jung's book. But thank you for that question. Big Bala, $5. Thank you guys for this stream. It was some interesting stuff. I'll give this to you, Father Deacon. What are the ways that Satan influences man?
Well, through messages. He's a messenger. He's an angelos.
You mean like text message? You're getting a text from Satan?
That's exactly right.
You need to go do this. You need to believe in Darwinism.
That's right. Well, I mean...
Oh, I just got a text from Satan, the Dark Lord. He says I need to believe in Darwinism.
Yeah, sorry. We made a mistake, guys.
Satan texted me. He said believe in Darwin.
Yeah, I would say that they're messages. And you can tailor your message given people's weaknesses, can't you? So if you're savvy, sly as a serpent, then you know people's weaknesses. You know what kind of messages that people would easily buy into. So
like screw tape letters, right? If you read this, a good presentation of screw tape letters.
So it's all about what messages are we listening to. We believe as Orthodox, we've been given the fullness of the revelation, the message, and that this is the only thing that actually grounds knowledge, is the necessary conditions for knowledge and all the things that we say that we could know, meaning. And therefore, we listen to the lives of the saints, we listen to the councils, we listen to the ascetic prescriptions, our father, our spiritual fathers. We're trying to always listen to good messages. And the more that we listen to that, and the better we get at it, then we're able to identify bad messages. And that's really all we've been doing this whole stream, haven't we, in this paper? What are the bad messages? And if you study the history of philosophy and political thought and all this different stuff, you'll see the bad messages. Ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have bad consequences. So I always thought that from when I was young, too, that the devil's playing, 64D chess. That he's playing is, he's not the one whispering necessarily something. That's sort of the kind of little demons, right? The foot soldiers. Satan's playing 3D chess.
Yeah, I think you could say on an individual level, he tempts us to have evil thoughts that we consent to do evil actions that violate God's law. And then on a macro scale, he influences entire nations and cultures and the spirit of the world as a whole.
Well, he sends witch soldiers, demons, to do that. So there's a whole hierarchy just in the angelic hierarchy of the good angels. There's a hierarchy, a kind of military order, chain of command with, and you get this kind of right even in the screw tape letters too.
Mm-hmm. Jay Dyer, $5. Professor Lord Dyer is correct about the species not becoming another species. Well, thank you. I'm glad that you accept my authority as professor wearing white lab coat. And so now we all know that Darwinism is false because I wore a lab coat and I said it's false. Kieran Murphy, $1.40. Jay, I love your work. How do you account for the similarity of monkeys and humans? By a similar creator. So the similarity in the DNA does not prove that there's a linear descent of humans from the monkey any more than it proves the creator right away, because either system can explain that data. So this is called the problem of the underdetermination of data. So creation versus evolution is not going to be proven on the basis of the similarity of DNA. There's similarity of DNA with a lizard too. Right. So
also, I argued this in my PhD thesis as well, that since Aristotle says human beings embrace all of nature, all the principles of nature, but rise above by the possession of nous, mind,
right, that
if we're composed of, we have an animalistic life, right? A sensual, right? A psychic life, like an animal does. But we're also composed, we have a biology, we have chemicals that how could we be made up of that if there wasn't an underlying necessary kind of base? So I would already expect to see those kind of similarities in nature because they form an overall kind of basis. That doesn't mean that I came out of it, but I couldn't be what I am without, seeing that kind of continuity.
Yeah, again, the similarity does not tell you that there's the common ancestor any more than it tells you that there's a single creator. In other words, the creation doctrine could explain that just as well as, and I actually think it's a better explanation than the common descent. You see, that's the problem with the underdetermination of data. You're interpreting that data to mean that it must be a common ancestor when it doesn't mean that. There's nothing that in that data of the similarity that tells you common ancestor. That's an interpretation of that data. And I can just as easily say, well, there's a common creator. There's common DNA because of common creator. Just like all living things have commonalities amongst the DNA. But by the way, the dissimilarity in that small amount, right, shows you the dissimilarity between a man and a lizard, right? There's a small percentage of difference between a man and a lizard. But guess what? That small percentage is a great deal of difference, you see. So this is a misconstrued bad argument.
And how do you even quantify? I forget who said it, that we share genetically, we're 99%, the same as a chimpanzee. But that 1%, I've always made this argument, is an infinite difference. Having mind, nous, and chimps don't. I'm not saying they don't have intellect, or they don't, but they're not rational. The fact that we have nous, that 1% might as well be infinite. The gap between that, and no materialist empiricist is going to be able to explain that. So it just kind of shows you the ridiculousness of trying to quantify everything, right?
Yeah. John Connor, $5. Are we in a simulation? No, we are not. The Bible is not Platonic, so we do not live in a dream. We do not live in a computer simulation.
And God is not a deceiver.
God is not Satan, right? So,
God,
the master.
If we're living in a simulation world, then God would have to be a deceiver, right? Mm-hmm. He's keeping us from reality. He's deceiving us.
No, this is why we believe in the doctrine of creation. Okay, so if you read Genesis or if you read Hebrews 11, then you know that the biblical doctrine, which we believe in, is that God created the world out of nothing, right? So there's no deception God that's like, putting the wool over our eyes and, Descartes' evil demon or whatever. No, we don't live in the Matrix. We live in this world. So I appreciate that question, but no, we don't live in the Matrix. Noe Contreras, $5. In regard to the transcendental argument for God, why can't a transcendental exist in a vacuum? Well, first of all, because it would require a justification and a grounding, right? So you can't just be arbitrary and ad hoc in your argumentation. And so the transcendental argument is an argument within the domain of philosophy and argumentation. So that realm does not allow for arbitrariness and ad hoc rescue. And so to say that transcendentals just exist in a vacuum, and they just are, as Matt Dillahunty did in the debate, would be to commit the fallacy of ad hoc rescue. Can tag be simplified because the laws of logic exist in our minds, but also outside of our mind in the same way that they exist in ours? There has to be a mind before ours that they existed in. Yes, I do think that you can make this. When I make the argument, this is a form of divine conceptualism that, yes, we're grounding things in the divine mind. I don't see a problem with that view, as long as we don't fall into Platonism, which sometimes, like the William Lane Craig version of divine conceptualism, can fall into Platonism. But I don't know that necessarily totally simplifies the transcendental argument. It's just one of the elements in the transcendental argument, or one of the arguments within the transcendental argument. So you can't really boil it down to just talking about the divine mind, because you also kind of have to flesh out what God you're talking about, right?
I'll boil it down. It's called the transcendental argument for Matthew McConaughey or something.
All right. Let's do it. Logic's just a flat circle. We're all just going around in a flat simulation like flat land. Marius the Big Dum Dum for $10. How does one reach people like I'm not going to name that guy, my brother is one of these arrogant people who refuse to listen. Thank you for your work. Thank you for convincing me to buy Bitcoin. Well, cool. Good. Yeah. And don't get disheartened.
Pray, by the way.
Yeah, pray for those people. You're not going to convince everybody about argumentation and logic, but just pray for those people. And then, don't get disheartened because we had a dip. Bitcoin typically after a big pump will take anywhere from a 10 to 20% correction. If you've followed Bitcoin for many years, you know that every pump usually has a 10 to 20% correction afterwards before we see the next phase of the pump. So
Jay, you know me, I was like kicking myself. I'm like, I should have waited 2 minutes.
Well, there's no perfect entry point.
You can't figure
You can never perfectly know the entry point or the exit point. So
No,
you can
you
do
make
your
it
best. And I had a terrible last couple weeks of trades. So, but thank God, at least I had the wherewithal
Well, actually,
to stop
there's
trading.
A perfect way. I have a transcendental argument for the
Or
existence
Bitcoin?
of
Okay,
Bitcoin.
well.
Yeah, so
Just sign up for his $100 logical Bitcoin course, and he will teach you for merely one Bitcoin. Father Deacon will teach you the secrets of Bitcoin.
Bitcoin, that's it.
Not a troll, $5. Why believe all this stuff when there's no historical evidence? Okay, well, first of all, I will make the transcendental argument to believe all this stuff, which is a stronger argument than mere historical claims and evidence. And secondly, there is historical evidence. So you're wrong on both accounts that there is historical evidence for Christianity. You say Jews were pagans influenced by Zoroastrianism. This is actually a 100-year-old critique that scholars no longer make anymore. So it is actually not the case that Jews were influenced by Zoroastrianism. There's very significant differences between.
Perry Robinson has a great.
Perry has a good take on that. Does he have an essay on that point at?
I think so, and he because there was a guy at the dialogue that
would make this argument.
Was an atheist that was trying to make this.
Yeah.
And he's from Yale, like I expected.
This is a 100-year-old higher critical argument that people don't make anymore. But
and Perry just ripped it apart. Like Perry did an awesome job.
Yeah, so if you go to Energetic Procession, there's probably an essay there dealing with this objection, but there's really significant differences between even the Judaism of Jesus' day and its theology in relation to Zoroastrianism.
The times don't even match up. And so there's a whole bunch of arguments. Yeah,
there is no proof for the Exodus or Jericho's conquest. Well, actually, let me allow you one obvious proof, which is the Bible itself. So these people just say that there is no proof, there is no historical documentation or evidence. Well, the Bible itself is a one historical document that has actually a wide amount of textual veracity behind it. So
what titration test did you do?
Yeah, right.
What was the pH level on that? I mean, if it doesn't fit my criteria for evidence, then...
And by the way, not a troll. I appreciate your $5, but you make this interesting sort of flip there, where you say that there's no proof for Exodus or Jericho, by which I assume you mean evidential, empirical proof, but do you actually think that there's evidential empirical proof for what happened 5 million years ago, or for the idea that one species can transmutate into another species? Actually, there is zero evidence for that. There is evidence for adaptation. There is zero evidence for one species becoming another species. And at this point, usually the Darwinists will say, species doesn't actually exist. That's just a name that we created to classify different things. It doesn't actually exist. Well, if it doesn't actually exist, then DNA doesn't actually give you, right, one type of thing producing another type, or that same type of thing. But it does, right? Whales always produce whales. Whales never produce bears, okay? So one species code never produces another species code. And that is one of the strongest proofs against this ridiculous transmutation theory. So the fact that people observe mice in one setting, having their fur go from gray to brown due to environmental factors, that has nothing to do with proving that the mice will eventually turn into a muskrat or a mink or whatever. Okay, there's zero proof of that. Nobody has ever empirically verified anything like that. The fruit fly bullshit also doesn't work, and there's plenty of things that debunk all that fruit fly stuff, by the way. Noe Contreras, $1. I just want to say that your channel has very much influenced me in the last few months. Glad to hear that. Thank God for you and your work. I pray that God continues to bless you and your family. Thank you. Well, thank you, Noe, and I appreciate your tag questions, and I'm glad to continue to answer them to the best of my abilities. Jay Dyer 888. What are your thoughts on possible DNA assimilation into the human genome from fertility cult rituals involving animals? I guess you could say when we eat animals, we absorb their DNA into our being and into our DNA to some degree, but I don't think that changes necessarily humans to be something other than human. I mean, I believe that things have essences. Okay, so I don't believe that everything is just kind of chaos and flux and turning into every other thing over millions of years. There are specific kinds, right? There are common ancestors, for example, between a wolf and a puppy, a Labrador or whatever. There was some common ancestor for dog, okay? But that doesn't mean that, therefore, there was a common ancestor between a whale and a dog, okay? So fish were created different, a different species, a different kind from a dog, okay? So, but I don't think that cult rituals, like, caused our DNA to, like, turn into something else. Like the cavemen were doing cult rituals. So maybe you're thinking of the Terrence McKenna theory. Like, he has this chapter where he talks about monkeys started doing acid from
mushrooms,
and then that's how they developed human consciousness, right? I don't believe that. Vazcaz $5. Jay, can you recommend a good book on epistemology? Well, the one that Father Deacon recommends is the Bonjour text on epistemology. It's a mint green book that's really good. I would recommend that, as it gives an overview of the domain of epistemology. In what sense was Jesus tempted, since he could not be tempted in any way like portrayed in The Last Temptation? Right. So The Last Temptation of Christ is a blasphemous movie that presents Jesus as just another dude. But Jesus was not subject to Adam's ancestral or original sin. Right. So he's born of the virgin so that he avoids the corruption proper to human nature in terms of the blameful passions that are passed on to everyone. However, when he assumed the flesh that he assumed from the Virgin Mary, he did take on the blameless passions by will. So he willed to take on the mortal state in order to raise it and deify it above even the blameless passions. What do I mean by blameless passions? I mean hunger, thirst, weariness, right? These are all passions that come down to us as a result of the fall, but they're not in themselves sinful. And so Maximus has a whole I think it's Athanasium 21 or 23. It's in the little blue book where he talks about this very question, right? Where he says that Jesus had by will taken on the blameless passions, but because he's born of the Virgin, he never had blameful passions. So in that sense, in that way, he was tempted, as Hebrews says, but because he's the divine Son of God, he would never give in to temptation, you see.
Correct.
And so that's where the whole Last Temptation of Christ portrayal is Arian and Nestorian. Father Deacon, did you want to say anything on that?
Absolutely, yeah. Well said. That's exactly right. Correct.
All right, so...
I'm going to yell.
Oh, no. All right, everybody. Be sure, of course, and follow Father Deacon. Congratulations on surpassing 4,000. I noticed your channel.
Thank you. Yeah, I noticed that too.
Yeah, your channel is over 4,000 now. So his channel is linked in the show description. You can follow him. And do you plan to? And by the way, if everyone has not seen the stream, you can go to your channel and you read the paper.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I might kind of read and then talk at the same time. Make points.
And so
off the paper as well.
Right. So if you guys want to, go listen to that. And then if you haven't noticed, I did do for subscribers the part 2 of the lecture on the Mafia and the 5 families. So that was out. That was good. Did a whole bunch of research this weekend on serial killers. So a lot of new evidence turned up in regard to weird connections with the serial killers that I didn't know before. So kind of following in the train of Dave McGowan's book, we've people are turning up a lot of really interesting, and not, I don't just mean me, I mean people in like the true crime community who don't really have any conspiracy quote unquote views are actually turning up some really fascinating stories in relation to some of the serial killers and their connections. Noe Contreras, $1. This is for Father Ananias. Any argument against Pentecostals or people convulsing and speaking in tongues? So he's asking you, Father Deacon, how would you argue against the Pentecostal practice of kind of flopping around and talking gibberish?
Yeah, well, so scripturally, glossologia and analyzing that those are actual tongues, and that our God is not a God of confusion. I have been, before becoming Orthodox, in, when I was Protestant, to Pentecostal churches, and I immediately, I came from, I actually went to Calvary Chapel, evangelical background, and going there, so it wasn't that I wasn't unfamiliar with that kind of style, like I was a Presbyterian or something like that, going, oh my gosh, what is it? But when I went there and experienced that, I definitely knew that it wasn't a spirit of God, that, and it was a type of possession. And the reason why I could say that is because I've been in several circumstances in my life, like kind of mob mentality and riots. And the idea is that, and a lot of the kind of like Frankfurt school people talk about this too, they take on several different things, like cults do. They decrease rational kind of thought and discursive reasoning and analysis. And they tend to, like, mantras, right? No justice, no peace, no justice. And what you start to realize, you have a loss of individuality, and then you kind of have like a group spirit, like an animal spirit, like being in these kind of mob mentality where you're no longer yourself anymore. And you're kind of taken away. There's literally like possession of spirit. That is the same sort of thing that I felt in Pentecostal movements when they're doing that. That I knew even at like 18 years old that like there's something demonic here. Like this is a possession. You don't lose your identity and rational faculties and start speaking non-intelligible gibberish language. So I'd say both from scriptural, from an analysis of like psychology and cults and possession, that it's quite clear that it is a spirit. It's just not the spirit of God.
Yeah, also, Father Stephen Morose's book, Orthodoxy
Yes.
and the Religion of the Future, has a really good section treating of the charismatic movements and the errors there. By the way, the last stream that I did a couple days ago comparing Roman Catholicism and Protestantism, and then at the end, second half of that talk, the one that I did that was about 3.5 hours, I critiqued dispensationalism and charismaticism too. So I'll put that link right there if you want to.
Jay, I was going to ask you, Aleister Crowley's parents, were they Pentecostals or were they?
No, they were Plymouth Brethren, so they were
Brethren.
they were dispensationalists.
They were dispensationalists, yeah.
But
So
no, the Plymouth Brethren, even though they were dispensationalists, they had a tendency to kind of puritanical attitudes.
Yeah, that's right.
And so Crowley would often talk about that. He always resented that puritanical.
You should have joined the Pentecostals.
Well, actually, Crowley had an appreciation for Pentecostalism because he thought that the direct possession that the charismatics and Pentecostals engaged in was something that the Crowleyans should strive for. He actually said so.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Thank you, everybody. That was a great stream. Sorry about our sound issues. We tried the best we could. We couldn't get it all ironed out, but maybe next time we can figure it out. I don't really think it's Father Deacon's fault or mine either. If you noticed, we had the same problems yesterday with Cotel, and really it has to do with the constant updates. So anytime Streamlabs updates or anytime you get Mac updates, they have to be compatible, and it's a big hassle.
I was actually thinking it was a thing through YouTube, because what I started noticing in the chat is some people saying, I can't hear some people saying it's perfect at the same time, which means
who knows?
That it was it wasn't something from you or me. Like that's something, I don't know if it's because of the updates and the way that it's, because you're receiving my sound perfect, but when it goes through YouTube, it gets messed up.
So a lot of times too, when updates happen, it resets all the settings that you had to default, and that messes everybody up too. So, I don't know if that happened to you, but I'm just saying that was what happened to me in Cotel. But anyway, we got another one from Jay Dyer. He says for $5, this deacon speaks soothing, soothe. God bless you, gentlemen. Well, thank you, Jay Dyer. That's
Thank you.
name sounds familiar. It almost sounds like, seems like something hitting home. I don't know, but it's an almost cool name. All right. Thank you, Father Deacon.
Thank you, Jay.